Len, in everything that was happening last week, you may have missed the news on Friday that Spencer Silver, the inventor of the Post-it note, died at the age of 80. His story is one of serendipitous discovery. He was a research chemist attempting to create an adhesive strong enough to use on aircraft. He failed, instead inventing an adhesive that could easily be peeled off, a solution to a problem that didn't exist. The legacy of Spencer Silver's breakthrough is as much about Post-it notes as it is about the idea of space. Having the space to think, to learn, make mistakes and uncover those happy accidents that are a hallmark of scientific discovery through the ages. And it's something our panelist, Wesley Enoch, has been contemplating as well. Writing in The Conversation last week, he says that it's time to reinvest in the social capital of ideas and that big thinking has become unfashionable in Australia.
Too often we think the thing that makes us uncomfortable is wrong. I fear discomfort is no longer a spur to our curiosity to discover and explore new ideas. Instead, discomfort becomes a justification for the rejection of the new, the different, and the other. The arts, universities, public broadcasting, and the relationship with First Nations peoples are at the frontier of the new and the important big ideas we need to embrace and fund to build an Australia we can be proud of.
Wesley, you say it's been unfashionable for too long to be thinking about big ideas. Why is that?
Oh, look, I think that especially things that are politically convenient, things that are often very short kind of runs, the electoral cycle, 3 to 4 years, that's all we need to focus on. When in fact, sometimes the bigger ideas need to be focused on for 10 to 20 years. We don't know what's going to come out of it. I work in the arts, and the arts are all about big ideas and expressing kind of things that we don't know enough about yet, about creating a vocabulary for the future, for what shifts and changes can be. And often I've hoped that our political leaders have big ideas, and I think they do. When you talk to them, they're full of big ideas all the time, but they're sometimes being pushed out of this funnel, which is what is electorally palatable at the moment. What can win them an election? What can get to the next stage? And I'm finding too that a lot of funding, a lot of support is all about the instrumental value of ideas versus the joy of just a big idea happening. How can we make this something that is commercialized? How can we find a product that we can sell from this? Whereas like the 3M, I love that story of here's failure that becomes a success. Actually, I watched something recently. I've always been taking one of those Post-it notes from the bottom to the top. Apparently make them to the side so they don't curl in the wrong direction.
Is that why they're curling?
That's why they curl.
I find the rip-offs curl though sometimes, I think.
But this idea of big ideas,
Yeah.
and I think that to take the time out, if anything, the great pause that COVID allowed us last year, in all of the negativity, the positivity was take time out to think about things. God, I came out ready to write 3 plays. I'm ready to go.
Yeah, right. How many have you written?
None. I'm ready to go there.
So, what do we miss out on as a nation when we don't have time to think and think critically about things?
Well, I think we start to just skim the surface of things, and we start to go, as I say, instrumental. We just go, oh, what can I get for this? As opposed to what's the joy of just actually even to sit in nature and to reflect on ideas as well. Everyone's about reading a good book and reading something that can stimulate them, but how many people take the time out to reflect on the idea of the book, to focus and analyse what it might mean for their life? We just read it, consume it, go on to the next thing. Why don't we take the time out?
It's that idea, like you kind of sometimes want your kids to know what it's like to be bored so they can think of things to do, isn't it?
Agreed,
it's that
agreed.
idea.
And creativity at the centre of it.
Yes. Kerry, you're of the view that we're not lacking in big ideas.
No, I think, we've still got some of the most creative people in the world living in this country, and whether it's in the arts or, as I said, a sector that I'm working with now, lots of very clever people in the IT space coming up with things. I mean, the Atlassian boys came from Australia, so I mean, there's lots of really clever people around. But I would just like to make a comment about the political class, and I actually blame the media for the lack of creativity in the political class, because I mean, what used to happen would be people, when they were in opposition, they would come up with grand plans for all sorts of things, you know, whether it was infrastructure plans, whether it was new ways to deliver community services, all these sorts of things. And the idea would be you'd put them out there, you'd have a conversation about them, and what was good would be taken on board, what was bad would be rejected. But now what happens, if you put something down on paper, you know, what are we now? We're 2000 and, what are we?
2021.
Just trying to remember here, 2021. So if you put something down in 2010, and said, this was my grand plan. And of course, you know, everyone went around and looked at it and rubbished it all. Well, when you came back to be wanting to put your hand up to go into government in 2021, they'd say, but you're that crazy person who had that idea back in 2010, right? So I actually I'm blaming you guys because you don't allow politicians to be as creative as they could.
And Labor got slapped around last election having some big ideas too.
Too many ideas was the call there. So we're so unforgiving of our mistakes. You know, in Spencer Silver's case, you know, that was the story that it worked. You know, it was as you said before, a reward from a failure. So perhaps our politicians need the time to make a mistake and then grow from it.
Yeah, well, and I don't disagree with that. But I mean, if you know, we've already been bagging out Greg Hunt because he didn't get the rollout out correctly. I mean, and, you know, fair enough. I think we can bag out Greg Hunt. He's a politician. He's got broad shoulders. But, you know, I have actually argued on this program before that the reason we've done as well as we've done with the whole of the COVID crisis is that we have learnt from every mistake. We've actually learnt how to do quarantine better. We've learnt how to, you know, get the supply of vaccines better. We've actually learnt from those mistakes. But if you're a politician sitting anywhere in any house in this country at the moment, I mean political house, most of the time all you're getting is being bagged for what you got wrong. You're not getting the credit for what you've done. But I actually think they've learnt and they're learning and they're doing it better. And as I said, I just bagged them about not getting the disability stuff, but I'm hoping that they will learn from that. Because, we are really critical as a nation of anybody who makes a mistake.
Well, let's go back to Atlassian, though, where I think here we've got the big ideas. How do we support them along the way? And do they have to run off overseas to do it? And how do we back them is the bigger idea.
And let me say to you that I think one of the things which the government is federal government is finally getting its head around is an industry and manufacturing fund.
And in the budget we saw R&D incentives,
totally
the patent box.
Support those big ideas because, you know, we have plenty of people here. But let me say to you, the difficulty we have is that the attraction from places like Israel, which has been at the forefront of IT development, like the United States, for those people, and it's not just Silicon Valley, it's all sorts of other things. Our people are being courted all the time. So all power to the governments when they're saying we're going to put money into them to keep them in this country.
Christina, do you think we're at a place where, you know, we look at some of the big ideas that have come and changed the way that perhaps we live our lives with, say, Medicare or the NDIS, for example, huge projects that took a lot of thought that somehow maybe some people do or don't take for granted, but they're there and they deliver us health care. Do you think we're in a position where now we're thinking big enough to create ideas like that again?
I don't think we've ever lost it. I mean, you know, we are an incredibly innovative country. We're full of people who tinker in back sheds, and, you know, the fact that we didn't invent the post-it note is possibly a miracle. We probably should have. I love Spencer. I love the post-it note. The thing that's really interesting to me, you know, I'm a leadership coach, and what Wesley has said is spot on. We need think time. We need it to be legitimate. You know, we're filling our lives up with too much in our brains, too much, you know, if people are sitting there supposedly doing nothing for a period of time, they're criticised. We need to get out and sit under a tree and think. And then we need to support those people to implement so that they're not being lost to overseas, which is pretty much the history of really inventive people in this country, is that they end up leaving it. We need to keep them here. We need to make it we need to make it a legitimate occupation to be thinking, to be inventing, to be coming up with new ways of doing things, and to be collaborating, to get excited by working together around big ideas, to chuck out mistakes, to learn from iteration, to get into making mistakes and learning from them and not being so down on ourselves about it. You know, we're a very big on success in Australia. If you don't succeed, there's something wrong with you. And if you don't succeed immediately the first time, well, there's something really wrong with you. Well, the truth is we need to be able to make mistakes in comfort. We need to be able to share those, laugh about them, get on with it. And how many times did Spencer try it before he finally nailed it? It took him a while.
It's the apocryphal...
We're just not doing that. The think time isn't there. The space, the excitement around invention and innovation is pressured out, as Kerry says. It's, you know, it's not just the media. I think it is actually broader than that. I think it's our obsession with sport, our obsession with winning at all costs. We need to just realise that that's only a small proportion of the population.
Yeah.
There's a chunk of success that comes over time, over creating, over decades.
Now, Mukesh is nodding because it's a profession where, would you say, Mukesh, there is think time given to developing vaccines, developing cures? I mean, is that rewarded in the sense that perhaps we're not seeing rewarded in other areas?
There is obviously a great research tradition in Australia. And we've had great inventions and breakthroughs that unfortunately don't get developed because of lack of capital to take the next level. They then leave our shores and come back at a more expensive cost. And I think that's part of what needs to be reviewed. I work with a group called the MedTech Actuator, which is probably the big one of the big hubs for MedTech, startups to help them in that space. That's really important. In terms of collaborating, I love that. I've been asked to go into a group in Melbourne called the Melbourne Academic Centre for Health, which is actually a bunch of research institutes and hospitals in our part of town, all working together. And they also do that across the river with the other Monash partners, the other part of Melbourne, and the Western Alliance, which is all the way across Victoria. So it means you're not just at each other's throats all the time trying to get grants and so on, but you can actually stop and think. But I think that things like, I love the thing about the green dose. We have tried to push that, but it doesn't meet the funding model. You try and do something, it doesn't meet the funding model. So you don't get anywhere, and that's when you stumble across, you've got a great idea and you just can't take it anywhere further.
And the sense of play that's possible, you know, we ask that of kids all the time, play and just be useful and play. How do we keep that into our adult life in a very serious way in terms of medicine and things? But this idea of how do we keep this joy of the ideas and playfulness and not be shut down by others? Because I think sometimes people are confronted by ideas that they didn't have or they didn't hear about.
It might make them
make them
uncomfortable.
uncomfortable. And so they go, that must be wrong because I didn't like it. And we have to get beyond that, because I think especially social media has created this kind of algorithmic tribalism that says, if we all agree, then people who don't agree with us are wrong.
Yeah,
and we have to stop that. We have to stop it.
Yeah, we've all got to try and get out of our comfort zone sometimes, I think, but we're running out of time.
Okay.
Chika, I'm sorry.
We shouldn't be too hard on ourselves because we send people to Singapore to teach them to be creative.
Yes, indeed.